So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of a scientific notation. Lots of things in science are either really, really big or really, really small. And when we're trying to keep track of data that's really, really big or really, really small, no one wants to write those things out, right? So this is an example of if you had a handful of, say, charcoal or carbon, that's about how many atoms would be in that handful of charcoal. And no one wants to write that number down and keep track of that number anywhere, right? So we want to be able to simplify that and make a usable number. Same thing here. This is the mass of a proton. Yeah. So no one wants to deal with that number. No one wants to do math with that number, write that number down. So we come up with a way to shorten these numbers, and it's called scientific notation. And scientific notation has two parts. It's got what we call a decimal part. It's got an exponential part. The decimal part is some number between 1 and 10, right? And the exponential part is always a times 10 raised to some exponent, some power. What do you guys know from math about multiplying and dividing with powers of 10? What does that do with reference to a decimal point? Yeah, every power of 10 will move the decimal place one place, right? So if we multiply by 10, that moves the decimal place to the right one. If we divide by 10, that moves the decimal place to the left one, right? And so that's what this piece in blue is telling me here. It's saying move the decimal place some number of places. And this positive or negative is telling me which direction to move it. So I alluded to this the other day, but I want you to remember that if we see something like this, if we see 1.2 times 10 to the minus 10, that's the same thing as saying 1.2 divided by 10 to the positive 10, right? So we can move things around on the fraction bar by changing the sign of their exponent here, okay? So now this is saying divide by 10 times, right? That's what that means when we see that. So dividing by 10 times moves the decimal place in what direction, how many spaces? Well, is it going to move left or right? If you're not sure, take 400 and divide by 10. What do you get? So decimal place move to the left or the right? To the left. So what does this notation mean right here? It means take 1.2 and move the decimal place 10 places to the left, and that will be our number, right? So again, this is a shorthand method for writing really big or really small numbers, right? What would that number be? It would be this number. No one wants to write that number, so we write it in this fashion instead. Right? So again, a positive exponent means you multiply the number by 10 that many times. A negative exponent means you divide by 10 that number of times. Okay? So here's some examples, right? If we want to put this number in scientific notation, what we're going to do is we're going to move the decimal point so that we get a number between 1 and 10. So in this case, we get the number 5.983. And then we have to say how many times we move the decimal place. So this says if I take the number 5.983 and I multiply it by 10 3 times, I'll get my original number. Over here, this says if I take 3.4 and I divide it by 10 4 times, then I will get my original number. Does that make sense? Is everybody okay with this? Scientific notation is something you've done before, or is this new? Because I don't want to take 30 minutes explaining something that you already know. So if we already know it, great. If we don't know it, we need to learn it. Let's learn it, okay? So you tell me, have you done it in at least 2 classes before? Okay. Then we'll not dwell on this. We will go through it kind of quickly. Can you put this number in scientific notation for me? You may have to walk closer. Can you tell me, will the exponent be positive or negative just by looking at the number? Negative. How do you know that? Because it's a little number. Small numbers have negative exponents. That's right. So what will the decimal part of this number be? Say again? The exponent part will be negative. The decimal part is always that number that's between 1 and 10. So what is that part going to be of this scientific notation? 7.0, is that what I heard? All right, I'll buy that. And then it's going to be times 10 to the, and you told me it's going to be negative. We know it's negative because it's a small number. And then the only other thing is to figure out how many times the decimal gets moved, right? So let's see if we can count them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 7.0 times 10 to the minus 11. Everybody okay with that? Good.